The year is 1500, and the world is a dark, fractured puzzle held together by fear and superstition. To the people of the 16th century, the horizon was not a destination, it was a physical wall, a terrifying boundary where the known world ended and the nightmare began. Maps of this era were filled with empty spaces, decorated only with illustrations of krakens, sea serpents, and warnings of, "Here be dragons." It was believed that the Atlantic was a sea of darkness, a place where the sun boiled the water and the air turned into a thick, poisonous fog that would melt the lungs of any man brave enough to breathe it. Yet, in the face of this absolute terror, a strange fever began to grip the heart of Europe. It wasn't a fever of bravery, but a fever of desperation. Europe was a continent under siege, choked by the Ottoman Empire's control of the Silk Road. The gold was gone, the silk was rare, and spices, the black pepper and cinnamon that the kings craved, were more expensive than human life. This was the spark that lit the flame of the age of discovery. It was a time when men decided that the risk of a gruesome death at sea was better than the certainty of poverty on land. When you look at the massive wooden galleons of the 1500s, you aren't looking at masterpieces of engineering, you are looking at floating coffins. To step onto one of these ships was to sign your own death warrant. The sailors who manned these expeditions were the outcasts, the desperate, and the mad. Life on board was a slow descent into hell. Hundreds of men were packed into spaces so tight they could barely breathe, living alongside rats and livestock. Within weeks of leaving the harbor, the fresh water would turn into a thick, green slime filled with larvae. The hard biscuits, their only source of food, became infested with weevils that sailors eventually learned to eat in the dark so they wouldn't have to see what was moving in their mouths. Then came the Dutch death, scurvy. As the belly begins to swell, the reality of the physical sacrifice deepens. This is the stage where the skin begins to stretch until it feels like it might tear. It's an itch that cannot be scratched, a burning sensation as your organs are pushed aside to make room for another life. Your lungs are compressed. Every breath becomes a conscious effort, a shallow gasp for air. The honeymoon phase is a myth for many. Instead, it is the beginning of the chronic back pain, the feeling of a hot needle being pressed into your spine because your center of gravity has shifted. The emotional weight here is the invisibility. People stop looking at the woman's eyes and start looking at her stomach. She becomes a vessel, a walking incubator. Her career, her dreams, and her identity are often sidelined in conversations. She struggles with her body image, seeing her shape change in ways that feel alien. There is the hidden pain of the brain fog, where you lose your words and your sharp edge, feeling like you're losing your mind along with your waistline. The kicks, while beautiful, are also constant reminders that you are never alone, never truly at rest. Your bladder is a playground, your ribs are a punching bag. You smile for the photos, but at night, you lie awake wondering if you will ever feel like you again, or if that woman is gone forever, replaced by someone whose only job is to suffer in silence for the sake of the future. As the mid-16th century dawned, the ocean had ceased to be a barrier and had become a vast, blue cemetery for the ambitious. The initial shock of discovery had worn off, replaced by a cold, calculated hunger for total domination. This was the era of the conquistadors, men who were neither soldiers nor explorers in the traditional sense, but private contractors of destruction. They moved through the dense, suffocating jungles of Central and South America like ironclad ghosts, their heavy armor rusting in the humid heat, their minds obsessed with a single word, El Dorado. The legend of a city made entirely of gold drove them into the heart of darkness, where they faced terrors that no map could have prepared them for. They encountered rivers that ran for thousands of miles, forests where the canopy was so thick that the sun never touched the ground, and tribes who fought with poisoned arrows that brought a slow, screaming death. Every step inland was a step away from civilization and a step closer to the primal ferocity of a world that did not want to be found. The psychological toll on these men was immense. Far from the courts of Europe, the thin veil of morality began to tear. In the absence of law, the strongest and most ruthless rose to power, leading to internal betrayals that were often more violent than the battles with the natives. Mutiny was a constant shadow. Brothers turned against brothers over a single gold ornament. This period saw the rise of the black legend, a reputation for cruelty that would define the European presence in the Americas for centuries. The search for gold became a religious crusade in their minds, a divine right to take whatever they could grasp. They didn't just want the wealth of the land, they wanted to erase the memory of what had been there before. Temples that had stood for 1,000 years were torn down stone by stone, their sacred carvings smashed to provide the foundations for colonial churches. By the time the mid-1500s transitioned into the latter half of the century, the world was no longer just being explored. It was being exploited on a scale that defied human imagination. The initial wonder of seeing a new coast had been replaced by the cold, mechanical efficiency of the colonial machine. In the heart of the South American continent, at a place called Potosi, the Spanish discovered a mountain made almost entirely of silver. This rich hill became the dark heart of the global economy, a place where the earth was hollowed out by hundreds of thousands of indigenous laborers and, eventually, enslaved Africans. The conditions inside these mines were a literal vision of hell. Men worked in total darkness, breathing in toxic dust and mercury fumes, often not seeing the sun for weeks at a time. The silver pulled from these depths didn't just fill the coffers of Spain. It traveled across the Pacific to the Philippines and into China, creating the first truly global currency. The world was now tethered together by a silver chain, and every link in that chain was forged in human suffering. While the mines bled the land dry, the oceans became the stage for an even more complex and deadly game of global chess. The arrival of the galleon trade meant that the world was now a circular loop of commerce. Ships were no longer just carrying men, they were carrying ecosystems. This was the era of the great maritime superpowers, where a single storm or a single naval defeat could bankrupt an entire kingdom. The English, long considered a backwater nation of sea dogs, began to challenge the Spanish monopoly with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Men like Francis Drake were celebrated as heroes in London and cursed as demons in Madrid. They circumnavigated the globe not just to see the world, but to burn Spanish ports and plunder treasure ships.